He called it God's will. They called him Father. But on that Georgia plantation in 1848, the children of Josiah Harrow were born twice, once by his hand and again by his sin. The soil around Hollow Creek still smells strange after rain, like it remembers the blood that fell into it. You won't find it on any modern map, because it's not the kind of place that dies. It just sinks deeper, waiting. Josiah Harrow wasn't a man of impulse. He was a man of conviction. He studied Scripture like a weapon, twisting the verses until they bled into something useful. The line must remain unbroken, he'd say, pacing the parlor floor as his sons knelt before him. His daughter, Elara, would stand at the doorway, eyes glassy, body stiff, a lamb who'd already accepted the slaughter. He said her womb was divine soil, and their duty was to plant the seed of heaven itself. The sons didn't speak. They obeyed, because in that house, disobedience didn't bring punishment. It brought revelation. At night the slaves would hear screams from the big house. They weren't the kind of screams that come from pain. They were the kind that come from prophecy. The kind that shake through walls and make the dogs whimper. The Harrow sons would come down in the morning pale and trembling, their eyes too wide, their lips moving without sound. The overseer said he saw Josiah standing on the porch once, hands red to the wrist, whispering a prayer that didn't belong to any god he knew. The neighbors avoided the family, but they couldn't ignore them. The Harrows owned 300 acres and 60 souls, and Josiah's sermons drew crowds from miles away. They said he could make a man weep with a single word. They said he could stop a heart with two. No one dared to question him because those who didn't last long in town. The sheriff vanished one winter. A preacher's wife lost her voice overnight. He lanterned against the curious. That was the saying. And yet something else grew on that cursed soil, something the Harrows didn't plan for. A child born with the same blue eyes as the father, but darker, colder. They said he never cried, only stared at the fire, smiling, as if he already knew the truth of his creation. The new preacher came in the spring of '49, Reverend Leighton, a soft-spoken man with tired eyes and a spine bent from years of carrying other people's sins. He wasn't from Georgia. His voice carried the slow smoke of Tennessee hills. Folks said he was sent by the district synod, though no one could remember asking for him. He arrived with one trunk, a Bible, and a conviction that the devil hides best behind the pulpit. The first time Amos met Josiah Harrow, he felt something inside him shrink, like his bones had learned fear all over again. Josiah greeted him with that calm smile, the kind men wear when they already own your next breath. His handshake was warm, too warm, as though fevered blood pulsed beneath his skin. "You've come to see God's work," Josiah said, gesturing toward the plantation like it was Eden itself. "But you'll need faith to understand the design." That night, Reverend Leighton stayed in the guest room, the one they never used. He heard footsteps in the hallway past midnight, soft, deliberate. He rose to look, but when he opened the door, the corridor was empty except for Elara, standing at the far end in her nightgown. Her hair was loose, her face ghost-pale, and her eyes fixed on something behind him. When he turned, he saw nothing, just the cross hanging crooked on the wall, swaying as if it had been touched. At breakfast, no one mentioned it. The table was heavy with silence, thick as syrup. The sons sat like shadows, hands folded, eyes glassy. Elara didn't eat. Josiah carved meat with surgical precision, his smile never faltering. "Reverend," he said finally, "you believe in the sanctity of creation, do you not?" Amos nodded, wary. "Then tell me," Josiah whispered. "If a man is made in God's image, what happens when that image is purified, distilled, made perfect through itself?" The words hung like smoke. Elara's hand trembled, her knife scraping against the plate. Amos forced a laugh, trying to brush it off as philosophy, but something in Josiah's tone curdled his blood. That was when he noticed the drawings etched into the wood of the table, symbols burned in with care, looping like vines, spiraling toward the center where a single name had been carved over and over. Elior. That night, Reverend Leighton didn't sleep. The walls whispered. The wind carried voices that weren't wind. And from the hall came a sound like a woman praying, but not for mercy, for memory. Reverend Leighton found the name again the next morning. Elior, scratched into the window pane of his room, backwards, as if written from the other side of the glass. It shimmered faintly in the light, like the mark had been carved not with a blade, but with heat. He touched it, and the chill that ran through his body wasn't from the glass. It was the same kind of cold that follows a prayer said too late. He tried to speak with Elara that day, found her by the well behind the smokehouse, her bare feet sunk in red clay. She was humming a tune without melody, the kind you can't tell is sad or holy. When she saw him, she smiled, a strange, fragile thing that looked borrowed, like she'd forgotten how to do it herself. "Elior," Amos said carefully. "Who is that?" Her smile fell away like dust from a statue. "He's the promise," she whispered. "Father says he's the first who'll never die." The wind shifted. Somewhere behind them, a door slammed. Elara flinched and turned toward the house, eyes wide. "You shouldn't ask about him," she said. "He's not supposed to be seen yet." And before Amos could press further, she was gone, swallowed by the house like a shadow slipping back into its master. That evening, the Reverend went to the barn, drawn by a noise that didn't sound like animals. It was rhythmic, breathing maybe. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of blood and herbs. Candles burned in a circle on the dirt floor. At the center stood a cradle, old, handmade, rocking though no hand touched it. The cloth inside moved. Amos leaned closer. The movement stopped. He lifted the fabric. What he saw wasn't quite a child, not in the way he understood children. Its skin was pale as parchment, eyes open though it couldn't yet speak. And those eyes, they were Josiah's eyes, the same piercing blue, only colder. The thing didn't cry. It stared, straight through him, and its lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. Then came the whisper, soft as breath, though no mouth had moved. "Father says you'll see the light soon." Amos staggered back, knocking over a candle. The flame hit the hay, flared, then died, snuffed out as if by unseen hands. The cradle stopped moving. The air went still. And from the house, faint but clear, came Josiah Harrow's voice. "Reverend, come inside. Supper's ready." The next morning, the Reverend found the house quieter than a churchyard at midnight. The sons were gone from the table, their chairs pushed back, but still warm. Elara was nowhere to be seen. Only Josiah remained, sitting by the window, with a Bible open across his knees. The pages were blank. He smiled when Amos entered. "The Word," Josiah said softly, "isn't always written in ink." Amos tried to keep his composure, but every inch of him screamed to leave. Still something stronger than fear held him, that awful, hungry curiosity that drives a man toward the fire, not away from it. "Where are your children?" he asked. Josiah's gaze didn't shift from the empty pages. "Preparing," he said. "We'll be ready when the moon bleeds. You'll understand soon." That night, Amos searched. The Harrow library was vast, its shelves bowed under the weight of old theology, occult diagrams, and journals wrapped in leather too cracked to date. The air reeked of oil and dust. He lit a candle and read the spines one by one until he found it, a small, unmarked book bound in dark hide. It was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly like a living thing. On the first page, in careful script, was written, "The Book of Continuance," by the will of Josiah Harrow, 1843. The handwriting changed as it went on. Some entries were neat, almost scholarly. Others were jagged, written with such force the quill had torn through the page. Amos read, and with each line the bile rose higher in his throat. Josiah wrote of purity, of returning humanity to its unbroken source. He described the merging of flesh and faith, the recreation of God's image through self-born lineage. "Elior is proof," one passage read. "The blood repeats itself, and the circle draws closer to heaven." Near the end of the book, a date was circled in red ink. April 14th, 1849, 2 nights away. Beneath it the words, "The offering of Lee. One must see, and one must feed." Amos closed the book, heart pounding. Then he noticed the sound, the faint rhythmic thud of something being dragged across the floor above him. He followed the noise up the stairs, every step creaking like a warning. It led him to Elara's room. The door was open just enough to see inside. The floorboards were covered in chalk symbols, spiraling outward from the bed, where Elara knelt, hands clasped tight around something glowing faintly beneath the sheets. She was praying, not in English, not in any tongue Amos knew. And as she whispered, her breath frosted the air. Then she turned her head, slowly, her voice still a low chant. "He knows you're reading his book," she said without looking up. "He says it's too late to leave." By the time the blood moon rose, Hollow Creek felt like it had slipped out of time. The air hung thick and unmoving, the trees still as if listening. Reverend Leighton hadn't slept in 2 days. He'd burned the Book of Continuance in the hearth that morning, or at least he thought he had. But now, standing in the upstairs hall, he could still smell its pages. Charred parchment, iron, blood. From the great room below came the low hum of voices, Josiah's voice rising and falling like a tide. Amos descended the staircase, candle in hand, and saw them. The sons standing in a circle around their father, eyes vacant, each with a length of rope tied around his wrist and leading into the center of the room. At the circle's heart was Elara, dressed in white that was no longer pure, her hair tangled, her lips moving in perfect unison with her father's chant. "Come down, Reverend," Josiah called without looking. "You've been chosen to witness the rebirth." Amos froze. The flicker of candlelight danced over the walls, revealing sigils drawn in soot, carved deep into the plaster. Every symbol pointed to the center, where Elara knelt. In front of her, the cradle, the child, Elior, awake, watching. Josiah raised his hands. "Behold the unbroken line, flesh of flesh, soul of soul. The blood repeats, the light renews." The sons began to sway, their ropes pulled taut. Amos's candle sputtered as the air grew heavy, thick with something metallic, something alive. The baby's eyes glowed faintly, not reflection, not light, but something inward, pulsing. Josiah reached into the cradle, lifting the infant high toward the crimson moon spilling through the window. "From me, through me, to me again," he cried. "The Lord returns where he began." Amos shouted, "Stop this! You're murdering them!" But his words drowned beneath the chant. The room shook. The walls groaned as if under pressure. Blood seeped through the seams in the floorboards, slow at first, then flooding, warm around his shoes. Elara screamed, not in pain, but in release. Her head tilted back, eyes rolling white, as Josiah pressed his palm to her chest. "She is the vessel," he roared, "the door through which heaven walks again." The baby began to laugh, a thin, shrill sound that sliced through the chanting. Amos lunged forward, wrenching the Bible from his coat. He shouted a verse he could barely remember, voice cracking, desperate. The moment the words left his tongue, the candles burst. Light flared, blinding, violent. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, Josiah was gone. The sons lay on the ground, eyes open, throats uncut but empty, as if drained from within. Elara was breathing, barely, and the cradle was empty. Amos staggered outside, choking on the smell of burnt wood and iron. The moon hung low, red and swollen. Behind him, from the darkness of the house, came a sound, faint, crawling, wet. A child's laughter. Reverend Leighton left Hollow Creek before dawn, barefoot, clothes stiff with blood that wasn't his. He walked 15 miles before he found a man willing to stop his wagon. When they reached the nearest town, Amos collapsed in the road, mumbling about fire, light, and a child with no shadow. They took him to a doctor. The doctor said exhaustion. The sheriff said madness. And when Amos tried to lead them back to the plantation, the road wasn't there anymore. They searched for 3 days, found nothing, no house, no field, not even the outline of a fence, just a patch of scorched ground where the air shimmered, hot even in the rain. "The earth swallowed it," Amos whispered. "He brought it down to hide what he'd made." The men stopped looking after that. They said some places don't want to be found. Years passed. Amos grew old. His sermons turned quiet, fractured. He avoided mirrors, flinched at children's laughter. But on storm nights, he'd write letters, dozens of them, to no one in particular. Warnings, prophecies, confessions. He mailed them to churches across the South, never signing his name. In one, he wrote, "The blood does not end. It remembers. It waits for the right name to speak it again." In 1866, a family from Savannah bought the land near Hollow Creek. The husband was a merchant named Caleb Brandt, his wife a pale woman who never spoke above a whisper. They built their house on the ridge where the old plantation had stood, though they never knew it. By autumn, they had a child, a boy born during a lunar eclipse, with eyes the color of winter sky. The midwife said he didn't cry, just stared, smiled, like he recognized her. When the Brandt boy turned 5, the neighbors started talking. Livestock found drained in the fields, strange symbols carved into trees. The boy, walking at night, whispering words no one could understand. They said his voice sounded like 2 people speaking at once. His mother claimed he'd started drawing faces he'd never seen, a man with burning eyes and a woman in white, both watching from behind a cracked window. In 1872, the Brandt house burned to the ground. No bodies were found inside. The land was abandoned again. But even now, the locals say that on nights when the moon turns red, you can see a figure walking the old path, a man carrying a child that never grows. If you listen closely, they say, you'll hear the child humming a tune that has no melody, the same one Elara sang by the well. And when the wind stops moving, if you dare to whisper the name Elior, The ground trembles, just once, like something beneath it remembers you. In the summer of 1923, Professor Malcolm Reeves of Emory University received a parcel wrapped in oilcloth. No return address. Inside was a bundle of weathered papers, letters mostly, bound with a strip of black ribbon that had long since turned brittle. The ink was faded, the handwriting uneven, trembling. Across the top page, one line was scrawled in desperate haste. "Do not dig in Hollow Creek. The roots still breathe." It was signed with a name that meant nothing to him at first. A. Leighton. Reeves was a historian by trade, a skeptic by reputation. He specialized in religious sects of the Reconstruction era, but what drew him in was the impossible precision of the fear in those letters. Every word carried a pulse. He spent nights in his office, candle burning low, tracing the stories of Josiah Harrow, of the bloodline that never broke, of a child named Elior, who was born of himself. It read like myth. But myths, Reeves knew, always leave a footprint somewhere. He followed the trail to rural Burke County, to the coordinates mentioned in one of the letters. The locals were polite, but uneasy. The older ones turned away when he mentioned Hollow Creek, crossing themselves when they thought he wasn't looking. At the general store, the owner muttered, "Ain't nothing out there but swamp and bones, mister." Yet that night, Reeves saw something from his inn window, a flicker of light deep in the pines, too steady for lantern flame. He went the next morning, notebook in hand. The land was wild, thick with kudzu and decay, but he found the remnants of a foundation. Blackened brick, half swallowed by earth. Nearby, a stone marker leaned sideways, etched with a name nearly lost to erosion, Elara H. And just beneath it, smaller, newer markings scratched by hand. "He still walks." Reeves knelt, brushing dirt from the stone, and felt something cold seep into his palm. The ground was wet, not from rain, but from beneath. The air grew heavy, hot, and wrong. He heard a sound then, faint but distinct, the distant lilt of a child humming. No birds, no wind, just that tune, circling him like a fly over carrion. That night, back at his lodging, Reeves developed a photograph he'd taken of the grave marker. As the image formed, his breath froze. Behind the headstone, in the grain of the photograph, stood a figure, tall, indistinct, holding the hand of something smaller, both staring straight into the camera. The child's eyes, even blurred by time and distance, gleamed pale, almost blue. He stared at the image until dawn, and when he finally looked away, he noticed something on his desk he hadn't seen before, a new page among the old letters. The handwriting was the same as the others, though he hadn't written it. "The blood remembers. The circle is never closed. You have been seen." Professor Reeves tried to tell himself he'd imagined it. That exhaustion had conjured the extra page, that the figures in the photograph were tricks of exposure. But something deep inside him, that primitive part of the mind that still fears the dark, knew better. He slept with the lamp burning and the curtains drawn. He began to notice small things moving when they shouldn't. A pencil rolling off the desk, though the floor was level. His notebook left open to words he didn't remember writing. Elior sees. The light repeats. He took to locking the papers in his desk at the university. Yet each morning when he returned, the top drawer stood open, and the bundle of letters lay exactly as he'd first found them, tied in that same black ribbon. It wasn't possible. The janitor swore no one had been inside. Reeves stopped arguing. He simply started reading again. But the words were different, subtle at first. A changed phrase, a missing date, and then unmistakable. One letter that had once warned, "The roots still breathe," now read, "The roots still feed." He compared it to the photograph he'd taken earlier. The ink had bled, as though the letters were sweating. He felt sick, but couldn't look away. Over the next weeks, Reeves chronicled everything. Each night he read the letters by lamplight. Each dawn he transcribed their shifting phrases. His journal filled with sketches, the sigils from the Harrow house, the spiral that had once circled Ilara's bed. He wasn't copying them consciously, yet his hand moved with terrible certainty, tracing lines that felt remembered rather than learned. Students began to whisper. They said Professor Reeves spoke under his breath when he walked the halls, reciting verses no one recognized. One night, the night porter found him asleep in his office chair, candle guttering, a name written hundreds of times across the walls. Elior. Hideki had to leave Georgia, to take the papers north, to lock them away somewhere safe. But when he packed, he found something new among them, a photograph of himself, taken from behind, standing over the grave marker at Hollow Creek. Only now, in this image, the figure of the man and child were closer, almost touching his shoulder. And on the back of the photograph, scrawled in fresh ink, was a date, April 14th, the same day Josiah Harrow had written of his offering, the same blood moon, 74 years later. That night, the lamp flickered once, then died. In the dark, Reeves heard the rustle of paper, and a child's voice, faint and curious, whispering just behind his ear, "Will you finish what he started?" In 1954, when the Board of Regents ordered the renovation of Emory's East Wing, the construction crew broke through a wall that was never listed on any blueprint. Behind it lay a small sealed office, dustless, as if the air had never aged. Inside was a desk, a chair, and a single lamp still standing upright. Everything else was neatly arranged: papers, photographs, journals, each labeled in meticulous handwriting that seemed carved rather than written. The name on the door had long since faded, but the brass plate still clung stubbornly to the frame. Professor Malcolm Reeves. They thought it was a storage room at first, until one of the workers found the notebook, open on the desk, pages warped but legible. The last entry stopped mid-sentence. "The light calls from below thee." The ink dragged down the page as if the pen had been yanked from his hand. Campus police investigated. They found no sign of forced entry, no evidence of violence. But there were anomalies. The temperature inside the office was 12 degrees lower than the hall outside. The clock on the wall still ticked, though it wasn't wound, and the mirror above the desk, the only one in the room, was cracked clean through the center, the fracture shaped like a spiral. When the archivists began cataloging the contents, they noticed something stranger. Every photograph Reeves had taken of Hollow Creek had changed. The negative images no longer showed the grave or the ruins, only trees, hundreds of trees, and in the center of each frame a faint outline of two figures, the man and the child, closer in each shot, sharper. One technician swore he could see the child smiling, not caught mid-expression, but deliberately, aware of the camera. In the corner of Reeves's desk sat the same oilcloth parcel that had started everything. Inside were the Leighton letters, their ink still wet. The archivist tugged at one and hissed in pain. The paper burned as if pulled fresh from fire. Yet the letters remained untouched, unaged. Only one page seemed new. It wasn't written in Reeves's hand or Leighton's, but something in between. Jagged, strong, ancient. April 14th comes again. The blood remembers. They sealed the materials, labeled them restricted, and locked them away in the basement archives, where they stayed untouched for nearly 20 years. But rumor spread. Students whispered that the East Wing was haunted. They said you could hear someone humming in Reeves's old office. A child's tune, faint and endless. Maintenance workers refused to clean there after dark. One of them, an old janitor named Ben Holloway, said that sometimes the lamp flickered on by itself, and a voice from inside the walls would murmur, soft and patient, "Still learning, Professor." In the spring of 1972, a graduate student named Elias Dorn was assigned to reorganize Emory's restricted acquisitions. He was 24, meticulous, painfully skeptical, the kind of mind that trusts filing systems more than folklore. When he reached the lowest corridor of the East Wing archives, he found a single cabinet wrapped in wire and sealed with 3 rusted locks. Its tag read simply, "Hollow Creek, Reeves Collection, do not access without provost approval." The locks had long since corroded. He cut them anyway. Inside were the letters, the photographs, the cracked mirror fragment, and Reeves's final notebook. Each item was labeled in a trembling hand that grew less human with each entry. Elias spread them across the table under fluorescent light, too bright, too clean, and began to read. The first page was nothing but scripture citations, Genesis, Leviticus, fragments of Apocrypha. The second was a map of Burke County, hand-drawn, with a spiral burned into the paper where Hollow Creek should have been. When he touched it, soot blackened his fingertips, warm as if the ink still smoldered. He told himself it was chemical residue, a fluke of oxidation. Yet when he returned the next morning, the map had changed. The spiral had widened, and in its center someone, or something, had written his name. Elias laughed it off. He was studying the psychology of religious hysteria. Reeves had clearly succumbed to it, but each time he turned a page, the room seemed to contract. The overhead hum flattened into silence. The air pressed close, thick with that faint smell of iron and damp earth. And then came the whisper, right behind him, soft, childish, curious. "Are you the next one?" He spun. Nothing, only the faint vibration of the light fixture above. He left early, locking the cabinet behind him. That night in his dorm, Elias dreamed of water rising through soil. Oh, if a house beneath it still intact, light glowing behind flooded windows. In the dream, a man stood on the porch holding a child. The man's mouth didn't move, but the child spoke for both. The circle opens when it's named. Elias woke at 3 a.m., heart pounding. The map from the archive lay open on his desk. He had not brought it home. The next morning, the curator found his office door ajar. The Reeves cabinet stood empty, wire locks on the floor. On the desk, a single new sheet of paper rested where the letters had been. 3 words, written in fresh black ink. "We begin again." The first reports came 2 weeks after Elias Dorn disappeared. A campus maintenance worker named Horace Dean said that every shortwave radio in the East Wing began picking up the same frequency at 3:17 a.m. A child's voice reciting names, none of them recognizable. The recording technician who tried to trace the signal found it wasn't coming to the building, it was broadcasting from inside it. By April, students in the psychology department began suffering lost time. They'd walk between classes and arrive an hour later than the clocks allowed, unable to recall the missing minutes. One girl woke on the library steps with her hands blackened, as if she'd been handling soot. On her palm, someone had drawn a perfect spiral in ink that wouldn't wash away. The university closed the East Wing again, citing asbestos removal. But off-record, campus security logged nightly calls about singing, low, wordless melodies echoing through locked halls. The janitors refused to work there after dark. One of them swore he saw a boy standing ankle-deep in a puddle that shouldn't have existed, staring into the reflection as though waiting for someone to surface. In late May, a rural radio operator 50 miles away reported bursts of interference that formed the phrase, "Hollow Creek." He assumed it was a prank until the signal started repeating coordinates, real ones, right down to the burned stretch of land where Josiah Harrow's plantation had once stood. Local police went to check. The site was swamp now, drowned trees, cattails, and a stillness too complete to be natural. But when the wind shifted, they said they could hear a generator somewhere underground, humming beneath the mud. One officer leaned close to the water's edge and thought he saw light, faint, red, pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat. The next morning, he resigned without explanation. By autumn, Hollow Creek had become a rumor again, a quiet infection spreading through late-night radio shows and small-town diners. People claimed their dreams were turning red-tinted, that old family photographs showed new faces watching from the background. A preacher in Macon said he'd found the word Elior etched across his church door in letters that bled when touched. And somewhere on the outskirts of Burke County, hunters began finding footprints in the mud, small, bare, each print pointing inward toward the swamp. They found the journalist's camera 6 months later, half buried in the mud near the ruins of Hollow Creek. The film was water-damaged, most of it useless, but one frame survived, a shot of the swamp at night, the trees stark against a blood-red sky. In the middle distance, a single figure stood on a ridge, holding a child. The reflections in the water were wrong. The child faced forward, but the reflection faced back. No body was ever recovered, no trace of the camp or equipment, only the coordinates saved in the recorder, repeating the same phrase over and over in static. The blood remembers. The blood remembers. The university sealed the Reeves and Dorn collections again. Officially, the case was unresolved academic misconduct. Unofficially, the East Wing was demolished. They poured new concrete, built a library over it, paved a parking lot where the old staircase had been. But the ground hasn't settled right since. Cracks form in the same spiral pattern, no matter how many times they repair it. Every few years, a student disappears, always one, always in April. The police say coincidence, the locals say inheritance. If you drive down the county road at night, the swamp looks peaceful. You might even think the fog is beautiful, the way it curls low over the water. But if you stop your car, if you turn off your headlights and let your eyes adjust, you'll see a faint glow beneath the surface. You'll hear something moving just below the reeds, humming a tune without melody. And if you listen too long, you'll start to hear words in it. Your name, maybe, or the name that came before it. Because the Harrow line never ended. It just changed its faces, changed its faith, changed its century. The blood remembers. It always will.